Recording in progress. Good morning. Welcome to coaching. So anyone read the email? Did you? So what questions could be answered by the REPC? How do we present using the contract? This is a huge skill set, I think, guys. This is a way to minimize objections to commissions, to show value instead of talk about value. Did you notice that question I said in there? How do I show value or say I'm really good at what I do without actually saying that? I mean, don't you want to tell sellers, look, you don't understand how amazing I am? Like the Ron Burgundy, I don't know if you knew this, but I'm kind of a big deal. People know me. Oh, come on, you guys. It's Ron Burgundy. I know. See, Zoom crowd, I'm telling you, it's tough. If you want a response from Zoom, don't just too high expectation. Just ain't gonna happen. But yeah, how do I actually show people I'm a big deal without saying that and being salesy and such? So there's a lot of ways I suppose we could do this. Thanks, Missy, for the emoji. There's ways we could do this, but my favorite way is to bring the contract in and show the complexities. And so I'm just going to take you through questions that I think that can be answered and presented by using the REPC. And admittedly, I did kind of put them in order, but sellers don't normally march linearly through the REPC. They randomly ask questions, and so then we pivot to the contract. So what we're talking about today is using the REPC as a visual presentation aid when you're talking to sellers and when you're doing your presentation. Okay. And so I've kind of outlined here, it's not in the manual, guys. So we can take notes on this though. I think, there's a couple of places I think we could look. If you want to grab a copy of the REPC in the legal chapter, that might be helpful. Or just make sure you have a REPC handy. That's fine. Your forms manual will be fine. Sorry, not the legal, the CE classes. That might be the best. It's going to show on the screen, so we'll get that ready. Yeah, have that ready. But if you want to take notes on these, I would probably put it in the communication section, which would be page 160. Okay, so notes on page 160, and then have the REPC handy 234. Sound good? Okay, let's jump right into it then. Well, what do you think would be the first question that could come up that we could answer from the REPC? You guys tell me. Maybe not the first one, but anything. Just what questions could be answered? Seller's going to ask you a question. What is that question? How can it be answered by the REPC? What do you think?
Earnest deposit, earnest money.
Okay, so if a seller says something,
and where does it go?
Yeah, where like if they say something like, well, tell me about earnest money, or how much is it, or what can I expect, or how does that work? So you might be tempted to just go ahead and answer that. And sometimes it's fine, but I think it's better to inject the visual. Okay. Remember, we're talking about showing value instead of telling value. And there's a big difference. It's like the unspoken words are more powerful. Okay. Like what you do speaks louder than what you say. Absolutely. So show them instead of tell them. Okay. So what we do is we pivot to the REPC by saying something like, that's a great question, Kim. I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of sellers ask about earnest money and how that works. By the way, at this point, I could even ask why you're asking. Like, it sounds like you might be referring to something. Was there something in the past about earnest money to go right? I mean, I want to make sure I have clarity, right? But if not, the pattern is, that's a great question. Other sellers have asked similar things. What I think might be best, Kim, if we look at the agreement that addresses earnest money, there's a couple of places. And let me talk, let's just grab that agreement and refer to that. So I can phrase this a number of different ways, okay? So I'm going to pivot to the contract with this transition sentence that says, I think it might be best if we take a look at the agreement. Okay, that's the transition sentence. I think it might be best. Now I could say it might be best if we take a look at the sentence or the paragraph or a section or something like that. There's a lot of different ways to communicate that. But depending on what they're asking me about earnest money, like I might say, earnest money is an interesting question to ask, because earnest money, as definition, is there for potential damages if the buyer defaults in the eyes of the seller, correct? So, I might want them to explain more about that. So where would I go to talk about earnest money? Well, I've got paragraph 1, right at the top, about when it's due and how it works and where it goes. John, this is what spawned the thought yesterday when you were talking about earnest money and the issue you had with the title companies holding earnest money. Again, you could say, that's a great question. Let's pivot to the agreement. Let me show you why it matters where the earnest money is deposited. It matters because of the statements of, here, let me share screen and show you. Are you guys seeing the manual or no? Kim, you seeing the manual? You do not see the manual?
No.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Sorry, this is it's being weird. Why? It's giving me 2 desktops to choose from. I haven't had that before. I'm stuck. Let's see. Let's go share. Let's see if that works. Now, are you seeing the manual? Yes? Okay, great. Yeah, so here's the tip. That's a good question. Let's take a look at the agreement form document that addresses that. And then here we go. And, this is what the image, I hope, says what I'm trying to say here. If you master these forms, you've got an S on your chest. Okay. So let me pan through here and just get to the REPC. So since you brought up earnest money, Kim, paragraph 1, obviously this is where it goes and when it's due. We may find ourselves in the weeds about how to address days or something like that, but it's really important to understand why it goes into a brokerage account, real estate brokerage account right here. Why is that important? Because of how it's governed in this agreement. That's why it's important. And I know it's a reminder for a lot of you, but the skill set here today is not necessarily the REPC. The skill set today is to use the REPC as the visual tool. So now you need to know where do I go to talk about this? Well, section 8.1, it can be released to the seller without further written authorization. Okay, I know you know that, but did you know where it was? And can you refer to it? And can you present using this? Okay, so without further written authorization, it can be released to you. See, if they cancel. Okay, there's times when earnest money becomes non-refundable. It's kind of a different, I've color-coded that a little differently. In the appraisal condition, okay, if they waive the right to appraisal or it's after the deadline, again, without further written authorization. That's the contractual position. Now I'm gonna start sharing, since we're on earnest money, get this, I'll get in the weeds on some of this stuff, guys. So does that mean if we have the contractual position on earnest money that people just give up hundreds of thousands of dollars without a fight? What do you think? You think there's hundreds of thousands of dollars in the Berkshire Trust account and they object to the being released without further written authorization, that they're just going to roll over and go, yeah, no problem, take the money? No. But what position would you rather be in? You'd rather be in the position of strength that if it all went all the way to court and everyone had to weigh in and we exercise our legal rights, what position would you prefer to be in? Obviously in the right side of the contract, right? So, okay, I don't want to make the class about earnest money. I'm going to make the class about how to use the REPC. So let's move on to the next point. What's another question the seller might ask that could be answered by the REPC? Think what sellers ask you.
One of the number one questions I always get asked is, what should I fix in the house and how many repairs? So would that go with like the seller disclosure or the buyer's disclosure section in the REPC? Or buyer's due diligence, I guess?
It's a good point. Yeah. When you get into that, what do I have to repair? Then I think my mind goes first to 10.3 and then to 10.2. and talk about, this, how do we sell the property? Well, we sell the property in as is condition. Okay, so you have to be able to know where that is. So here's 10-2 and there's as is. So we go, but how do we get this protection for a seller? Because that's a protection. It's a contractual protection and it says to the buyer that you can't come back to the seller and make improvements and request improvements to the property. Okay, the seller's not going to make it new. They're not going to make it to code. They're not going to make it safe necessarily. All these things that they don't fall into as is. So the skill set here is to know where some of these keywords are so you can refer quickly to it. So it takes memorization. So section 2, as is. And then how do we get the protection is all in 10-3. And I would turn this upside down and I would read to them, how do we get the protection? So when they say things like, well, I'm asking you, what should I repair? And things of that nature. Well, remember, we first have to disclose everything that's a problem. So maybe we should discuss that. Like, what kind of damage do we have right now to the property, deferred maintenance, all those issues. There's another form that'd be great for this that's not in the REPC. What would that be? Let me stop for a second. What other form would be awesome to talk about, what a buyer is going to inspect or look for, or what form could I?
Property disclosures.
Yeah, we could definitely look at the property condition disclosure and refer to that. I guess where my mind was going there, Sherry, was the buyer due diligence checklist, because this is what the buyer is going to march through, and the disclosures answer that almost secondarily, but I'm going to go look at this. How do I get my answers? Well, I go find some of these answers in the property condition disclosure. So remember, the skill set today is to use forms and contracts, so REPC sections, supplementary clauses, disclosures, as the way we present in a listing presentation. Okay, so refer to those and use those to teach from. Okay, what's another question? Another question a seller may ask you. I'm going to give you one. How about I'll play along here. So when I go to sell my property, what am I selling? What am I obligated to sell and what am I not obligated to sell? That's a great question. I think we might want to do is look at the agreement the buyer will be presenting to us when they purchase. And if I'm introducing it for the first time, I would say this is the real estate purchase contract, that realtors are authorized to use this and only this form. So we're likely to see an offer come in on this form. Very rare that we do not. And in section 1.1 is everything that would be included. Let's read through that. And you tell me if there's anything on this list that you do not want to sell with the property. We might also want to talk about fixtures, things that are attached. We may talk about appliances and things of that nature and the things that get us in trouble. Recently showing a property, the seller said that all the TVs were included. Is that stated in section 1.1, the TVs? Yes or no? No, the TVs aren't. It was an extensive Apple TV. That's amazing. Like there was a hub in the utility room that had all the receivers for Wi-Fi and smart TVs. All of this was there, and then Apple TVs for every TV. So that's extensive. Is that listed in section 1.1? So this is where we get down to the details about protecting what their expectation is. Are you expecting to sell this? Yes. If yes, why? If no, why? Let me understand that better. And how do we contractually protect them? We had a seller who was disgruntled at a buyer and wanted to take the Tesla charger out of the garage. And do you remember that scene in Liar Liar where Jim Carrey had his car towed? And they gave him the bill, and he goes, "How do you guys sleep at night?" Anyone remember? And he reaches in and grabs the air freshener and says, "I'm taking this." Okay, no one remembers. Okay. So I'm taking this. Well, that's kind of what I envisioned the seller doing. He walked out into his garage and he looked at his Tesla charger that is a massive 220 power cord that's wired by an electrician into the house and said, I'm taking this. And we're like, no, you're not taking that. You want to know how that actually ended up? Well, okay. It was an $8 million house. And Berkshire had both sides of the transaction, and our seller was also a buyer. You want to know how much a Tesla charger is? It turned out to be $1,600, and then you have to pay for the installation. So we were into it about $2,000. We just bought a Tesla charger, and we called it good. Okay, but each deal's a little different. But when I say we, the agent, you know, and that was not a bad deal. You guys want to really quickly do the math on that? You want to anybody want to just trade Tesla chargers at $2,000 to make the commission on selling an $8 million property at a 3% side? Oh, and they were a buyer at also 9 million or 8 million, something like that. Yeah, it's easy. No problem. I'll buy all the Tesla chargers you want. But that was an example of someone having an expectation that was not in line with the contract. And so how do we address that? Section 1.1, what's included? What am I selling? That's the skill set. So let's look at the contract, read through that, and use that as a presentation tool. What's another one that could come up from sellers? Sellers ask you a question that could be answered by the contract. It's like Steve already did the math.
Will, I have one.
Yeah, hit me, Jill.
So I've had sellers ask me on the inclusions, the agent just put on the inclusions per the MLS, but didn't itemize anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so then asking, well, do I really have to include the extra fridge, the stereo system, blah, 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 because it's not itemized on the inclusions?
Okay, let me address that. It's been a while since that's come up. So some of these agents who are doing that are either extremely lazy, or they're a veteran of decades, because there was a time 15 years ago where it was taught that was okay. So, well, why is it not okay? Why couldn't we just say in 1.1, all items included in MLS listing, and then state the number? And then use the MLS printout as, say, an exhibit. We might say, see Exhibit A, and then everyone initials the exhibit. Why would we not do that? What's the problem with bringing the entire MLS listing into the contract as an exhibit? Why do you think that backfired?
I think it's because we are human with our input, and I don't want you to refer to the MLS data where there could be mistakes as part of my contract. I think that you need to rely on buyer and seller and their agreement that's written out clearly.
It's a good answer. And if we were playing Family Feud, Rachel, I'd give you the number 2 or 3 answer on the board. So what's the number 1 answer? Peter, if you're talking, I can't hear you. I mean, I see your mouth moving, Peter, but you're on mute. Maybe you're talking to Kim in the office, or Jen, and you're really not talking to me. That's what you're really doing? So you're just, oh, well, okay. I still appreciate you being a part of the class and multitasking.
I'm multitasking.
All right, so back to the question. Why don't we want to bring in the MLS listing as an exhibit? I'll go ahead and answer that. Here's the biggest problem we had with it is that the MLS listing has data like lot size and square footage. Okay, so the appraiser comes out and measures, and it's not the same square footage, but you've just incorporated contractually all the data on the listing, including the square footage. So this made it really tough to sever the difference in an invitation for offers, which is the MLS, versus the contract, because they became one. So everything that was in that listing, whether it was intended or not, became part of what I get as a buyer. If it was off on the lot size, the buyer wanted a concession. If it was off on the square footage, they wanted a concession. So we immediately, we as an industry, immediately, the instructors, I guess I should say, immediately did a 180 on this and said, that's a no-go. And then to Rachel's point, we also saw just mistakes. And so if you make the mistake, because it's your data, who do you think got sued? I mean, this is an E&O claim. You know, errors and admissions claim. We had an error on the data. It was incorrect, unintentional, and then we ended up paying claims against that, and that's not a fun process for anybody. Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm gonna say Forrest Gump here. That's all I have to say about that. Okay. All right, let's do another one. I'll just bring in another one. How about what cost do I pay? What cost do I pay? Well, where do I find all that? If I were to use the REPC to present costs, where would I find that? You guys think about that for a second. Let me pull it up. Someone says, well, what cost am I obligated to pay? What a great question that is, right? And where would you go? I hope you're thinking of section 3. Okay, so here we are at settlement, what costs? So where might I see costs? Do you see the word? So here we have any monies paid. This is buyer transfers. Hopefully they're not upside down. Boy, I remember those days though, when the sellers had to bring money into closing. So what costs will we see in here, guys? Proration of HOA dues, property taxes, interest, any kind of capital improvements, all here. And we jump down, here's HOA, other fees. So this is where we can talk about the costs if we want to use the contract for that. Remember last week, I said there are questions that you have to answer before you can take a listing. And there were some core questions, and that came up in, the core questions were about benefit, and then we had REPC questions, if you remember that. The core questions are like, what's my equity? Well, how do I figure out my equity if I don't know the costs? So here are the REPCs addressing costs. The better you know this form, the more you've memorized it, the more you're likely to present it. And the more, if you present it more often and use it, you'll naturally be showing complexity and problem, and then presenting solution and showing solution. And when you do that, you create value. Okay, so that's the reason we're even talking about this skill set today, is where can I sharpen my saw on this? Like, what can I do better? What can you do better? This is the thing to contemplate today. What can I do better at using the forms as a resource to me, as a presentation tool? So that's about costs. We did bring up like getting the house ready for sale contractually could pivot easily to this list since I've already got it up. Here's our seller's disclosures. Boy, there's a lot of work to go over here, but we march through these. You may even warn everybody that because this is tied to a deadline, I might point to this and say, well, this is a contractual deadline, meaning we must meet this deadline, otherwise we'll be in default. And I could go over to section 24 and show where, you know, these are where all of our deadlines are. And I show that. And then I come back to the list and say, this is where all the work is. Okay. This is my job to help you get all these things ready so that we can be in an enforceable agreement to protect you if we need to. If the buyer has defaulted and the seller did not provide the disclosures in time, they're going to find themselves in a very legal precarious situation where they don't have clarity on whether or not they could exercise, you know, the default section. and have damages because they've missed the deadline themselves. And attorneys dig into this. They go, oh, yeah, here's the list. Did you get everything in time? All of these things? Because if there was one that was missed, that's default. And in their summary judgment request with the judge, when the lawsuit is initially presented, they will ask for it to be dismissed based on the merits of the contract's not enforceable because the seller has already defaulted. And then the seller is going to instantly look at us and say, how did I get in this position, right? And heaven forbid that was on us. Like heaven forbid we had it, but we didn't pass it on to the buyer, deliver it to the buyer. Yeah, that would definitely put us in the crosshairs. Okay. What's another thing here? You think a seller might ask you if the property will be appraised? If it is, then how does that work contractually? And we read through section 8.2 and how that works. So will there be an appraiser that comes and looks at the house? Yes, likely so. You know, unless we have a cash offer, and even sometimes with the cash offer, the buyer may also want an appraisal. There was a suggestion recently. I think our mindset should be adjusted on this. So let me deviate for a second. In section 8.1 of due diligence, there's all this list of things the buyer can do. See right here where it says such as? That's all the things the buyer may or may not, you know, inspect. What's not on here that should be on here is appraisal. Appraisal should be in this group, right? So yes, it'll be appraised. How does that work? There's a deadline for it. It's about the earnest money. And that's how we'd be protected. So let's see what else I got. Yeah,
Well, I have another one.
yeah, hit me.
Seller asks, what will happen if we're under contract, and we're trying to find another property and we can't find one, so we want to cancel the current contract on our house.
Yeah. Good one. You know, we might, okay, I tell you what we could do. How about this? Since we're talking about using the REPC, what section do you guys think of? So the nature of this agreement is there's no seller cancellations. We've got buyer cancellations everywhere, but we do not have a seller cancellation except, and I might go to this section. There's only like really one way for a seller to cancel unless we add language, right? So the base contract says, you know, the only way a seller can cancel is if the damage is more than 10% of the property, then either seller or buyer may elect to cancel. That's the sentence. They're going to go, that's a problem. Yep, it sure is. So where would I go? Well, I need to build in a condition, right? And if I built in the condition, it would be subject to the seller finding a suitable replacement property within a time frame. Then I've built in a seller cancellation. Otherwise, I do not have one. I know a lot of you know that, but again, the skill set is to use this when you present. Okay? Good stuff so far? Okay, you got another one, Jill? Keep them coming. That was a good one. Yeah, burn the house down and then you can cancel. No problem. I mean, you might go to jail for arson, but you can't cancel them. And yeah. So, and our attorney just walked by as I said that, and he was shaking his head. Yes, that's true. You will go to jail. You'll be put in jail because you burn things. You're a pyromania. Okay, you're a Def Leppard fan.
Hey, Will.
Yeah. Hi, Sandy.
Hi, I thought I'd break up this rock fest.
Yeah.
The one thing that I know people are getting, I see a lot of this because it's just recently been put in the REPC, is the assessments and special assessments and the transfer fee for the HOA is confusing to people.
Yeah.
So I have people that are like splitting hairs on, you know, well, we don't want to pay for the HOA transfer, and it's like $240. And they're thinking, is what's the difference between that and a special assessment? Like if there's a bond or something that's coming through that hasn't been disclosed, they don't want to get stuck with that. So there's two different types of things there. And so I think it's really important to explain that to them
Mm-hmm.
as far as those assessments are.
Yeah, totally right. I got up on the screen, Sandy. Special assessments are from municipalities. So this would be our cities, governments, or towns. That special assessment would come from them. And the point here is that when the buyer writes this offer, they're not aware of any. Like, how are they going to know? They don't have these notices. So many, and representing the buyer, most of the time, the agents just say, well, the seller is going to be responsible for that. Well, in the disclosure process, or if you're a good listing agent, what you need to do is get out ahead of this and tell agents like, look, the seller is not going to pay all of this assessment. Maybe they've paid half, maybe they've paid up to this, this month, but they're not going to continue to the special assessment monthly fee if, the benefit of this improvement, they're not going to get, right? They're not going to be able to enjoy the benefit of the improvement. So that is a negotiation point. Listing agents should get out in front of it. The difference in that and the HOA, the guys, is how they fund their operations. HOA has to collect fees. They collect monthly fees, but they also have to deal with the labor to transfer ownership. And there's costs in that because there's time involved. So that's the nice way to say it. I'm telling you what, I just crack myself up sometimes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's the nice way of saying it. A lot of these HOAs are making serious profit on transfer fees. We know some that are in the thousands. So, you know who I'm talking about.
There's also oh gosh, what do they call it? Now I've lost my train of thought. It's a fee that when you buy a property that you have to pay to go back into the community. And we've had some of them don't have them here. And there's one area, there's anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000. And it wasn't disclosed until that it was even there. The seller didn't even know that there was a, what is the word? You know what I'm talking about. It's like the
reinvestment fee.
Reinvestment fee. Thank you. The reinvestment fee to the community. It's like you sell a house in our community and the new buyer has to pay thousands of dollars in order to live there. And that's not even disclosed.
Yeah.
And that's a bummer when you get to closing.
Yeah, good listing agent needs to get out in front of that. I'll tie this in. Remember we talked about the factors, and there's now 8 factors that we should memorize, and one of them is amenities. And often amenities are tied to these HOAs. So what the value is. So if you want to live in the community and be and benefit from the amenities, then there's costs to that. So what are the costs? And here are the costs, and this is what you get. So listing agents need to get out in front of that. So this doesn't become, seemingly just junk fees, or buyers have never lived in an HOA and been a part of that. They don't get it. But I mean, just big, for some of you, like, think about our markets on a big scale. Like I was just talking, look at Promontory. I don't know, Willow Creek was on my mind, and what the fees are to just golf and be a part of those memberships. I mean, they're hundreds of thousands of dollars. So relatively speaking, a lot of these fees are nominal. But what happens is that people have an expectation that's improperly set. And then along comes these $200 a month fees or $400 or transfer fees and things like that. And it catches them off guard because we weren't out in front of it. So we can do a better job of that as a listing agent. Okay, so, and that's what this is about today, is looking at all of this through the lenses of how do I become a better listing agent? How do I become better at my presentations by using my assets of forms? Okay. I think I may have one more on my list that I thought, maybe hit the top Family Feud top 10. Well, we probably kind of already did this, but I'll go back to it. Share the screen again. I think sellers have often asked me, what can I expect that the buyer is going to inspect? So there's the such as, this is what I would read. And then I would also bring in the buyer due diligence checklist and say, this is what we can expect from a buyer. They're going to look at all these things. And when they discover things, they'll let us know. We need to be very, very transparent as possible. Yesterday, we have a buyer who's looking at a lot. Let me show you guys something fresh off the news wire here. If you can, I'll show you on my phone. So we have a buyer who's buying a lot. It's about $800,000 and it's in Draper. And this is what we find on the property. Can you guys see that? Okay, so it's kind of up against the scrub brush. Here's a little, like a bigger picture of it as we're walking the lot. The lot is about 2/3 of an acre. There's a pipe sticking out. That's PVC pipe, about two inches in diameter. It's filled with moss and water. And when I put my finger to touch the water was freezing cold. There's been nothing disclosed about this at all. Not a word about it. So what do I have here? What do you think that is? Well, it's a vacant lot, Steve. I don't think we're the vent of a septic tank. At least I hope it isn't, since I just put my fingers in it. Frankly, I was about this close to tasting it. Yeah, so we're pretty sure it's a spring. Did some research and found out that the previous listing, not the one active on the MLS now, does say that the spring has been contained. Was not disclosed. All right. So there's all kinds of tests that may need to be done here. We may dig a hole, see if the backfills, what's the water table? Can we put a basement? How buildable is it? And if it's not as buildable as the buyer wants, then the value is not there. And all of this could have been better presented if the listing agent was a little better at their job, right? So it could turn out to be a real asset to the property. There's no water rights with these kinds of things typically, but I have known a couple of people in Draper that drank the water after they had it tested, and it's delicious water, but they have it, tested for bacteria. There's a funny story about that because the seller of mine put a spigot on it and put a little pressure thing on it, so you could just like fill up a cup of water or a bottle. And so he's like, taste this. And I'm like, it tasted amazing. Well, we went under contract and the buyer did a bacteria test of that water. And the bacteria came back at like 0.00, blah, 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 and I read this report and he's like, yes, it definitely has, contents of bacteria. And I was like, oh my gosh, I drank this water, like the whole glass of water. And he's like, oh, well, yeah, you're fine. Your culinary water has 100 times more bacteria than the water you drank. I was like, oh, that makes me feel great. But anyway, see, let me explain something. I'm what you call a latchkey kid. Do you know what that means? Okay, it means that when I was a teenager, both of my parents worked, and I came home from school, and there was no one there. Okay? So I had to entertain myself, which is proving to be a great skill set today in my 50s, because I can talk to this computer screen and just laugh and have a great time, right? Okay, so that was the final one I had. I like tying in what they're going to inspect, such as, look for the such as, read everything there, grab the buyer due diligence checklist. I'm telling you guys, if you do this, think about the complexities that you just brought to light for this seller. And they're thinking about asking you to list their property for 5%, for 4%, for 3%, for $100, right? They were thinking about, wonder what kind of discount they'll give me on this. Commissions are just so crazy. Maybe they'll list it for less. And until you show them your value. And the way you do that is problem solution equals value. So if they don't know the problems, they have no idea what the solutions are, and they have no value. And I've talked about that a million times. So own that, right? Own that. Remember, the core benefit here is to lower legal risk. When you enter a real estate transaction, there's risks that come along with it. We want to lower that liability. That's a benefit for using myself as an agent and Berkshire Hathaway as a firm. That's why you hire us. It's what we do best, is to protect our seller clients, our buyer clients, to lower their legal risk. And there's a lot of complexities when we do that. So this naturally ties in with Section 8.1 and all the such as. It's interesting on that section. I mean, look, consider this. Go back and look at it one more time. This isn't contractual, right? There's nothing. Let me center this. See where it says, I mean, such as, and it has this big list. Okay. And then it says any other matters deemed material. So this is the catch-all. But why list all these things out? Why not just say the buyer can expect anything they want? Done. Well, because this is education. The reason why these are spelled out is because we don't trust that everyone's going to look at the buyer due diligence checklist. So this is all for education. So let's use it as it's intended. We're better at presenting when we educate. So educate when you present. Hello? That's, you know, that's the saying. We're better presenters when we educate. So educate when you present. And when you educate, the difference in selling and presenting is that we educate, we have options, and we empower people. So that's a better presenter when we educate. Okay, we're not doing it like I have an agenda. The agenda is to teach them so they can lead themselves, and you help guide that process. Okay, so we're better presenters when we educate. So use that section as it's intended, which is to educate people on what they're going to look at. This should spark conversation with sellers, like, oh, that reminds me. Or you may say, is there anything on this list that, you know, we need to get out in front of? And then the importance of that seller disclosure. Remember, most lawsuits come from misrepresentation. I mean, it's way over 80% of the real estate lawsuits and litigation happen because the seller was not as transparent as they should have been with their property. And then the buyer discovered. I mean, just, I don't know who it was yesterday. Was it a plumber? Who some contractor, I think it was a plumber, came back to the same house and said, we have been here many times. The buyer just closed, right? And this contractor says, yeah, we've been to this house many times. Yeah, of course you have. Like, that would be just how it works, right? It's the same contractor from the same plumbing company. And he says, yes, we've done invoices on this. We've done estimates on this. And they went, what do you mean? They never told us, right? And then there's the lawsuit. So, the seller would have a hard time explaining that one away.
Hey, Will,
Yes.
that brings up the question on section 15, mediation. I get the question, what's the difference between shall and may have the option of parties?
Yeah.
Which in this case would apply if there was a lawsuit.
Yeah. I hope we've put this thing kind of to bed. I mean, the best answer on what to mark and fix in 15 is it depends on the situation, but most of the time, okay, like the vast majority of the time, it's better to say shall. It's there as a protection to lower legal costs if there's a dispute. Okay, so what's the exception to that? Well, you know, if the seller is an attorney, if the seller already has counsel, okay, that could be an exception. Or if there's complexities to the legal structure of the deal or something like that, that would be the exception. But like 8 out of 10, we're better to have shall. Okay, and if you want to take the class on that, we have a C class. It's called The Great Debate of Shall or May. Okay, and it's on our C class. Mark and I teach it. I really yet to find an attorney that deals with litigation in real estate, like really knows real estate law, that has disagreed with what I just said. Okay, I know there's an exception, but we're not talking about the outliers. We're talking about the majority of the time. So 80% of the time, now I didn't say 90, a lot of times people just shout, well, 90% of the time or 9 times out of 10. No, I think it's more like 80% of the time we're glad we have shall, because we force a discussion to happen before we get letters from an attorney and we get called to court, or there's a summary judgment requested or something. I mean, it's so much better to have that process there most of the time. And there's a class on it if you want to dig into that. So yes, Jill, you know, if we do fall into that, that's what mediation, that's why mediation is offered, is to lower legal risk. And we take advantage of that. Just another perspective on mediation. What does the brokerage do in our own agreements when we're the principal? Well, we have 2 contracts with customers that we're principals on: buyer, you know, representation agreements and exclusive right to sell agreements with sellers. So what do? Yeah, we mediate. Okay, so when we're the principal, we're doing what we advise our clients to do. You know, we mediate first. So, well, hey, guys, I hope today that we have sharpened our saw on how to use the forms to present and use them as a visual teaching aid and educate our sellers. And when we go to take a listing and put it on the market, I hope you can use that. Step 1, what do you think step 1 is to all of this? How do we begin? If you joined this and went, I'm not quite ready, I mean, how do you put yourself to work on making, you know, this come to life, this skill? What do you think the first thing you have to do? What do you got to do?
Role play.
Role play. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I wouldn't think it's the first, because you wouldn't know what to role play, but it's not a bad answer, Cindy. I think what you got to do is you have to memorize these forms. I mean, you got to commit, you got to study them. You got to be able to present them in a way where you can look at them upside down and point the key words out. So memorize all of these forms. Okay, let's say you're there already. Well, yeah, then practice, to Cindy's point, to go, when someone asks you a question, pivot to the contract and see if you can do that like naturally. I wouldn't be, you know, robotic about anything I do. And I wouldn't be every single time I do this. But I think we're missing an opportunity to show people value instead of telling them our value. You know, I'm kind of a big deal. You know, people know me. Why not just say, that's a great question. I tell you what, let's take a look at what the agreement says and go from there. Right? And then start teaching them and say, hey, this is my concern. Is this what you were thinking? Well, this is what the agreement says. And it kind of ties into, and then you can pivot other pages, right? Next thing you know, you're just presenting, and hopefully that's natural and authentic and not, you know, salesy or scripted or anything like that. Okay. Okay. Well. Oh, hey, before you guys hang up, don't go anywhere. I just want to tell you something, but it doesn't need to be recorded. Oh gosh, what is it? I'm going to stay on.